It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage my panelists today. So put your hands together, please, for Mayank Dhingra. He is the Global Director of Education Strategy. But before him, Dr. Tarif Alama, President of King Abdullah University from Saudi Arabia. Mayank is joining us as well. We have Dr. Ute Lieber, the co-head of Development of Education, Training and Employment over the Life Course Institute for Employment from Germany. We have Chris from Hong Kong. He is the Assistant Dean at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and Hong Kong. And of course, Ben Nelson sat right here, the founder and the chairman and the CEO of Minerva from the United States. Thank you so much for joining us. And really excited to get stuck into this conversation, building on what we heard in the previous panel. And Dr. Tarif, I'd love to start with you. You're next to me, and it's something we've been talking about before. And I mentioned it there in the introduction, the fact that lifelong learning is now no longer a luxury. It's something of a necessity, given the quick pace of the evolving world.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm certainly delighted to be here among the distinguished panel and to be discussing this fascinating topic. There is no question that we live in a world that is rapidly changing and evolving, and with all the associated volatility and complexity and so on and so forth. And let me start by a couple of numbers that will help answer your question. Recent research has projected that more than a third, actually closer to 40% of the jobs that exist today will be significantly impacted, maybe even disappear by 2030. But all those changes not only are going to change the jobs that we have, it's actually going to create more jobs as well. As a matter of fact, also recent statistics are talking about north of 80% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 do not exist today. So we're talking about a whole new spectrum today of jobs. Therefore, today, we started talking about half-life of skills. What was taken as a guarantee in the past, a lifelong guarantee, if you have a skill, if you have a job, it's with you until you retire, today has a half-life. And studies point that this half-life is about 5 years, maybe shorter when it comes to technology and digitization and things like that. And let me finish by one question. Based on, again, my background as healthcare, many scientists today believe that this generation and the future generations are going to have, the new norm for them is going to be a 100-year life. You are expected to live to be 100, which means you'll go through different jobs, different trainings, different vocations. Not only this, but also different hobbies and interests and so on and so forth. So my question to everyone, including myself, if you are going to live to be 100, are you well prepared for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this idea of a half-life and the thought of lifelong learning not just being in an educational context, but beyond. And I wanted to bring Dr. Ute on that because we talked about technological, ecological, and demographic change all being crammed into that lifelong learning as well. So what's your take on that?
So I think there are three major trends on the labor market, as you just said. So we don't only have technological change, but of course we also have the green transition, globalization, and we have the demographic change, which of course differs between different countries. So in Germany, where I come from, also in many other European countries, we have an aging workforce, a shrinking workforce, but of course the situation is totally different in several other countries. And as was already said, these developments have strong impacts on the labor market. So, and the situation differs between different sectors. So we can observe employment growth in some sectors, whereas employment declines in other sectors. And while in recent years, mainly lower skilled workers were at a high risk of being automated, this situation has changed with the evolvement of AI. So nowadays also workers performing non-routine tasks, higher skilled workers, are at a risk that their jobs are taken away by AI, by information technology. And against this background, lifelong learning is a necessity and not a luxury, and you should never stop learning.
And Ben, I like your model, Minerva. For those that don't know, a university based in the US, you're kind of taking a slightly different approach. I'm not saying you're ripping things up at the roots, but you're kind of really analyzing the traditional way of doing things and thinking maybe there's a better way to approach things. And I love, we had a guest earlier on the stage, and they're saying lifelong learning is an asset. It's not an early age endeavor. So how are you approaching things?
Well, you know, I think all too often we confuse the needs of the market, the needs that people will have to be able to adapt, with the role of institutions to have to teach them those things over and over and over and over again. That doesn't happen. The reality is that we need to equip human beings with the kinds of foundational skills that they can use no matter what happens. Oftentimes people refer to these types of things as 21st century skills, but the ability to distinguish between a fact and a claim, the ability to be able to decide how to make decision trade-offs and do cost-benefit analyses, the ability to apply various statistical models or understand computational thinking, the ability to understand unintended consequences of decisions, to be able to communicate effectively. These are skills that aren't just important in the 21st century, they would have been important in the 16th century. These are timeless. And the big problem is that our educational system has abandoned the explicit teaching of these types of skills at a time when we finally know how to do so. And so what we did at Minerva was actually systematize that process of teaching those types of skills that allow people to learn how to learn, so that the lifelong learning can be at their fingertips.
And we heard that on the previous panel, you know, the fact that we need people to move on in this different direction. But let's be honest as well, if many people I'm sure sat in the panel, and we all say we want to learn, and indeed we might in our own mind, but there are challenges to lifelong learning as well. And of course we'll delve into those. But Chris, I wanted to bring you in on this, you know, establishing that growth mindset, you know, that productivity that will come from it, the implication of that, and of course innovation. How can we do that?
Right. Well, I think we always see at the HUSC Business School, we always see that lifelong learning is very important for a student. So, I mean, during their journey in the university, we already build that mindset, build that skill set that they will continue to learn beyond their graduation. I mean, so of course, we also support them, by building community, alumni community, in which they can learn from each other. And also, we have a different program to support them in their long-term, lifelong journey.
And building curiosity, I suppose, you know, not just learning to pass exams, building that curiosity. And Mayank, I wanted to bring you in on that because you spend a lot of time in education ministries, you have in the past as well. What's happening on the front line in terms of policy as well as the educational institutions? Particularly, I know you mentioned to me previously, PPP models are so important.
So I think, you know, there are going to be some housekeeping factors for tomorrow, and that's technology competence, right? The ability to truly understand what's happening with technology, how to keep as much as physical security was an issue in the past century, how do you keep cyber security at the fore of it? How do you really look around the bend? How do you develop perceptual equity and then, you know, harness that for the good of the organization that you're with? But aside from that, what a lot of ministries of education are seeking is how do you build the other soft skills, right? And the soft skills are around, like we said, you know, curiosity, right? How do you keep that lifelong learning there? But equally critical thinking, equally creativity. Because when these three come together, the critical thinking, the creativity, and the ability to collaborate, that is when you have somebody who can actually take in work in this cross-dimensional environment that we are all operating in. And then how do you also build in other capabilities which are about understanding your own self, understanding somebody else. And when you're able to understand yourself and understand others better, then you can manage the workforce better. And I think the missing angle then is custodianship of the planet, because we all have just this one Earth left. And you know, if we do not take care of both equity, if we don't take care of the planet, if we don't take care of culture and preservation of culture, we are again losing out a lot. So I think what ministries of education and ministries of human resources are looking at is this complete quadrant set and saying how do we develop this complete human who can now join the workforce with all of these competencies and skills together.
And not kind of farming it out into these little boxes, but bringing it together. And Dr. Ito, I wanted to bring you in on that. You know, these public-private partnerships, we hear them said a lot. We've heard them a lot in the panels that people have been discussing today. But they do play a role in supporting this further training model that needs to happen, and that cohesion that Mayank talked about there of coming together, not least for the planet itself, as well as people's ability to learn going forward.
Yeah, so I think, of course, companies have an incentive to invest in further training. We know that mainly larger companies invest a lot in training, but there are differences between different companies. So, for example, we know that small and medium-sized enterprises often lack the financial resources, also time resources to offer training to their employees. We have differences in training participation between different groups of employees. We have lower skilled employees, for example, older employees who do not participate in further training. And what I think is important is that the government, that the states supports training of those who are underrepresented in training. So companies do a lot, individuals do a lot when it comes to training, but I think we also need some public instruments to support training of those who are underrepresented in training.
So I want to zoom in a bit more now on business and workforce strategies. And Dr. Tarif, I know this is something obviously in your universities that you're going to work closely with companies and how workforces can continue to evolve new technologies and skills and the reskilling initiatives that are needed for that and learning opportunities to play into that process. So in your university, how are you encapsulating this readiness for the workplace? I know it goes beyond just the workplace from that transition stage, but how are you setting people up for the future?
Well, that's a great question, and I guess I can talk from one point about the university as a job creator, but let me focus more, just for the sake of time, on any organization. How should we be approaching that as an organization so that we make sure that our workforce is skilled for the future and for the present, actually. The future is becoming the present in a very rapid pace. Classically, skilling and upskilling and reskilling of the workforce or training of the workforce has always been an initiative that is carried out by HR. And this has to change immediately. If the skilling and making sure that your workforce is up to par with what the industry needs, this really has to be championed by the higher leadership. The highest leadership of the organization, all leaders and managers at all levels should be involved in that. All obstacles should be identified and dealt with immediately. This has to be at the core of the strategy. It has to be at the core of the values of the organization. The incentives have to be aligned, because if you don't align incentives with your strategy, with your objectives, you never achieve them. This has to be part of your balanced scorecard. And I believe that organizations that are going to be able to maintain the skills in their workforce are the organizations that are going to flourish in the future. And that's going to differentiate them from organizations that are either going to shrink or perish.
So Chris, you're kind of in the same boat, you know, business schools acting as this conduit between education and, of course, getting people ready for the workplace, acting as that conduit between industry and academia. What role are mentorships playing for you, placements, live business cases? They're all part of the armory, so to speak. Are you seeing a progression there as well?
Well, I think it's really important that we work with different stakeholders. I think as a university, we are content creator. We create knowledge and also knowledge transfer. But I think we also need to work with a stakeholder, for example, corporate partners, to identify, the knowledges, that would be useful, to the workforce. So we may co-create content, a training program together with them. We may leverage on their special skill, kind of giving more opportunity, not just in the classroom, traditional kind of learning, but also maybe, different ways, more hands-on experience, working together with industry. We also, need to identify the need of the corporate and then work with them to help them to train their workforce, not just, our own
Are
students.
those conversations getting better? Because it seems like we've been talking about this for a long time, ever since I was in education. Are they getting better? Do you feel they're getting more productive?
Yeah, I think so. I think now we are working more closely. We have quite a lot of different examples that working together with our corporate partner, again, to co-create content for a student, to bring in maybe business projects for students so that they can really have a more hands-on experience. We also invite, some industry people to be mentor for a student so they get, early on, have a bit of kind of business experience. At the same time, we also work together a lot with corporate to develop programs that would fit their workforce so that, to help them, to continue their lifelong, educational journey.
And Ben, I want to bring you in on that because I know internships are a really big part. I was reading, I forget the percentage, but I know it's above 80, and I don't know, you can tell me, but the percentage of your graduates that have an internship before they even graduate, so they get a real taste of work. What's the percentage now?
95.
95, yeah. So you're obviously convinced.
Yeah, very much so. One of the keys to learning, to authentic learning, isn't the ability to apply what it is that you've learned in the same context in which you've learned it. Because an educational institution simply cannot prepare you for the infinite number of eventualities you're going to be encountering in the real world. And where education falls down, or educational systems fall down, is when we expect students to perform by learning something in a particular class, cramming for a test, passing that test in the context that they've learned it, but then what happens is that students very quickly forget everything that was on the test. So not only do they not retain the information, but then when it comes to the real world, and when you say, hey, apply this critical thinking tool in an effective way, they don't know how to do it. And when you have integrated experiences from experiential learning to co-curricular programming to internships, and you provide these students opportunities to reflect actively on how it is that they're applying what it is that they've learned in those other contextual environments, and you assess them on it, you now give them the kind of scaffolding to be able to take what they've learned in the academic setting and transfer it to a non-academic setting. When you traverse pathways like that in the brain, and you do so over and over and over again, you've now taught a learner how to actually authentically acquire and be able to use information. But a program that approaches that haphazardly won't be able to do it.
Because it needs that repetition and that structured environment.
Exactly.
Of course, we shoot out the other end of undergrads, of business schools, and then we arrive with Mayank in potentially an organization such as yours, and you're going to scoop us up and put us on a continual professional development program, because as you said, there's a half-life. It's no good just having your MBA, your undergrad. Now you're going to keep us training to keep up with everything. So what does that look like in an organization such as yours?
I think for an organization like ours, it's all about capacity building. So, we are trying to make sure that we are partnering with private enterprises, with government to build capacity at various levels. And I'll give you one example of what we are running. So with Saudi Arabia and with various entities in Saudi Arabia, we run something called HP Gaming Garage. And that's looking at skilling students on coding, design, AI, cybersecurity, blockchain, but through the gaming door. And there's perhaps no better place in the world than to do that than here in Saudi Arabia, which has this dual intersection of education and gaming. So with MCIT and NELC, we have given that micro-credential status, which means that students as young as 12 are on it, but we have PhD students as old as 60-year-old on that program as well. And then we have established a lab in Saudi Electronic University. So now you have an actual embodiment of the space where students and learners can go in, but you have micro-credentialing from NELC and MCIT. And now with Savi Games, we are launching an actual hackathon that's going to test the application of all of this. And at the end of the spectrum, we are going to have them go into the Savi incubator, which will allow for real-time investors to pitch into those, invest into these new prototypes and prototype games, which talks to the NGS, which is the National Gaming and Esports Strategy of the country.
And I want to come on to this gamification because I know Chris is nodding and you want to talk a little bit more. But before we jump onto that, Dr. Uta, all we hear about is skill shortages, all this training going on, all these lovely jobs out there, but people aren't necessarily ready for it. So how is this lifelong learning going to help cope with those skill shortages?
So, due to my point of view, I think the discussion on further training often focuses on learning within institutionalized settings, and I think what we should not forget is that also the major part of training takes place in the form of informal further training. So, learning that is integrated in the work process, training that often happens spontaneously, unintended. And I think companies should also try to create a learning-friendly work environment to provide social support. We also already mentioned mentorship programs, for example. So experienced colleagues, for example, can act as mentors or role models and give advice to others and show them how to learn effectively and which training measure could be the right one.
Okay, we've only got 6:40 on the clock. I want to talk about gamification. So Chris, I'm going to bring you in first, and Mayank, you follow it second. A new way forward to bring people in this region. Need no convincing about that. But Chris, from your perspective, you could talk through it, and then Mayank.
Well, I think, it is, another point I just want to bring out is really, I think we should not look at just, live learning of individual, but maybe I think we should look at the lifelong learning of organization. How we create organization and learning organization. And I think if by developing that, probably, that create a better environment for the workforce, to engage in a lifelong learning.
So I think there are two elements to this, right? Gamification is different than gaming per se, and from a gamification angle, we actually released something called HP Class Easy, which is a learning management system, which is with a company from Saudi Arabia called Classera. So together, what we have done is we have socialized and gamified learning, which means that every time a student engages on an activity on this platform, they earn a loyalty point. And that loyalty point can either become a gamification between classes, between groups, or can be used as points in the outside world to get discounts in an ice cream store to a bookstore. So, you create a social angle, you remove the pressure of learning by creating that social gamification. And then you look at scholastic gaming, which is to say that there is no other time in history where so many students have been on one medium as they are today, which is gaming. So how do you capture their attention on that platform and then convert that into future skilling conversations, into conversations around what are the other career paths that are available? Because if you can today code on a game, you're available to the entire software industry. If you can design a game, you're available to the entire media industry. In fact, today, the automobile industry is hiring the best game designers because the exteriors of the cars and the interiors of the cars, as they become infotainment centers and autonomous driving, are being designed by game designers. So there's so much happening both from a gamification and a gaming angle, and I think the culmination of that is super interesting from pedagogy or education point of view.
And I've personally, in my workshops, seen huge benefits from that. People love a game, right? They love the competition. Sometimes we try to make the playing field maybe a bit too level, and that doesn't necessarily inspire people to do their best. So yeah, I'm totally convinced. I don't think we can have a conversation about lifelong learning without thinking about some people that don't manage to stay on the bandwagon, because we're talking really from quite a privileged position really in terms of undergrads, certainly for business school. So maybe, Ben, if I could bring you in on this, and Dr. Uta as well, who are you seeing that's not embracing life learning when you have those conversations, and who's falling off by the wayside?
Well, sadly, the world is rife with individuals who have not been given those types of tools, nor the bridges as their jobs, their careers are being disrupted. Much of the civil strife that we're seeing throughout the world is coming from populations that were able to make a decent, honorable living in the world that we've grown accustomed to. They're having a difficult time in that transition now. And sadly, many of the re-education programs and the reskilling programs that we're seeing are woefully ineffective. There are countries that have spent billions of dollars on reskilling programs that have been complete and utter failures. And that is because of this assumption that reskilling is about training for a particular job. They ignore the concept of training the mind for flexible thinking, for systematic thinking. That, unfortunately, takes longer than trying to pass a test to certify someone. But the problem is that our approach to passing tests doesn't actually help people in that population. And so it's a dilemma that we have to face, that we actually have to over-invest in effective systems thinking, skilling programs, but those are very few and far between, sadly.
So Dr. Uta, if you could contribute on that as well, maybe mention, because they're a massive part of the economy, SMEs and the particular challenges that maybe they face too.
Yeah, you just talked about the dilemma, and talking about obstacles, again, barriers that prevent people from participating in training. So we know that especially lower skilled employees are less likely to participate in training. That's also a dilemma, as they are at a very high risk of being automated. So these are the group of people who should participate in further training, but they do not. That often has to do with mainly bad experiences they have made with learning. Maybe some people haven't learned for quite a long time, so they are afraid of learning. And I think it's important here to try to remove these barriers, to take away the fears of these people, and bring them back into learning.
And make it joyful.
Yeah.
And gamification.
Learning can be fun, yes. Just.
So Dr. Tree, if I began with you, I'm going to end with you, because I think it's something just to wrap up on everything we've discussed today, the key takeaways for the audience that's here. What should be the first steps towards building this inclusive, adaptable and scalable lifelong framework that we've talked about? What should we necessarily be investing in now to ensure that that happens?
I'm glad the question is, what should we be doing now? I think the first step is to have the conversation. We are having the conversations. We have experts from all around the world. We need to identify that it's an urgent need. It's creating the burning platform, for lack of a better term. But we are here. We have people from all around the world with different experience, with all disciplines, discussing this in a very serious matter. I am very happy to be part of this movement. I am beyond proud that Saudi Arabia today is taking a lead and is taking a very proactive approach. I believe that rather than this becoming a troublesome challenge, we may be able to create a wonderful opportunity and make the world a better place.
Well, on that note, look, 1 second to go. Big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. And thank you for talking us through the lifelong journeys and everything that's in store. We'll just make our way off stage.